Here is the list of scripts and resources I'll be using throughout this video. Most add-ons are built in with only a few sourced externally. These are in no particular order, but how I might construct the scene. The first add-on is an external one called Blender GIS. In a web browser, search Blender GIS. This is available on the GitHub page here. Have a read of the README file for further information and known issues. In the clone or download dropdown, I can choose to download zip. From here, I can save file. I usually save these in a Blender add-ons folder, so all add-ons are in the one location and easy to manage. This zip file just needs to be saved, and on install of the add-on, Blender will handle unzipping. We can open back up Blender. Press F4 for the file context menu and open Preferences. Now open the Add-ons tab. To install the add-on, we can click Install up top here. Navigate to where you've saved that file. Select it and click Install. When that installs, it should appear in the list and we can enable it. We can leave the defaults as they are. Back in the scene, when the add-on is installed, this new menu will be available. What we want to do first is set up a base map. Let's press A to select everything and press X and delete. So from the GIS menu, we can come down to Web Geodata and choose Base Map. The defaults here are fine for the map we will be importing, so click OK. That brings us into a top view and loads in the satellite image in the viewport. Press G to open search and to adjust the zoom level. Here I can type in London. In the zoom field, we can increase the level to something like 17. Click OK now to search. That updates the map view, and you can pan the view by pressing the middle mouse button. Rolling the middle mouse button will zoom in and out and gives you more control of the amount of map that you can export. Pan this around and just find an area that you want. Zoom in or out and get the amount of area you want to export visible in the viewport. With the location in view, you can extract the area by pressing E. That will capture the data. The larger the area, the longer this will take. This will export the map to a textured plane here in the scene. The next step is to get a 3D representation of the area. Let's come up to the GIS and get OSM or OpenStreetMap data. Here we can choose the data we want. In this case, I can shift select both buildings and highways only. The remaining defaults are fine, but we can increase the level height to 12. Now click OK. That will load in the models for this area. That brings us to the next add-on, Collection Manager. Let's open Preferences. In the Add-ons tab, search Collections. The Collection Manager adds extra functionality to help manage collections more easily. We can enable it and close Preferences. On the top right of the viewport, we get a graphic for collections in the outliner. If we press the M key, we can open up the Collections Manager. From here, you can organize the collections. Let's add a new collection and we can rename this GIS. Let's drag select all of these objects to make sure they're all selected. To add the selection to the GIS collection, press Ctrl and left click this collection icon to add them into here. Alternatively, press M and from here, Ctrl click this icon and add the selected objects to that collection. I'm going to select this base plane here. Press M to open the Collection Manager. Let's add a new collection. Rename this to Reference. Then we can Ctrl click and add that object in here. In the display options, switch on the Disable in Viewport and the Disable in Render. Now switch off the visibility of this collection. Let's come back to the scene. We can select the highway object. Press M and add a new collection. rename this roadway. Now add that object into this collection. We can move on now and separate out the buildings we will be working on. So select these models and tab into Edit mode. We can hover the cursor on these objects. Press L to select them. These can be separated out as separate objects. Press P and separate selection. Now we can tab back to Object mode. Let's select these 4 new objects. Tab in here and select them all. Press P and this time we can separate by loose parts. Tab back now. Select these 4 objects again. Press M and add a new collection. Rename this Buildings. Then Control-click to add these into that collection. Let's select the highway object and we can tab into Edit mode. I'm going to Alt-select this section of roadway here, then select all the remaining vertices right the way across to the end. Press P for the Separate menu and Separate Selection. We can tab back and select this new object. Now tab back into Edit mode. Press the / key to isolate this object. We can remove any extra vertices, so select it all. Press M and merge by distance. Let's return to Global View and we can tab back to Object mode. Press M and create a new collection. We can rename this Street and Control-click this object inside here. Next, we can convert this to a curve. Let's come to the Object menu and in Convert, we can convert this to a curve object. Let's press Shift+S and put the cursor back to World Origin. From the Add menu, let's add a plane to the scene. Press F2 and we can rename this Street Plane. In the Add-Ons tab, let's add an array modifier onto this plane. Increase the count a little bit to begin. We can also add a curve modifier onto this plane. In the drop-down, choose the highway curve object. We can then increase the count and create the street full length. Tab into Edit mode and we can scale this up and make sure it will be wide enough to cover the entire street. Tab in and adjust the scale if necessary to finalize this size. Let's open the UV editing tab. Press the / key to isolate this object. Press numpad 7 and come into a top view. Press U and choose Unwrap to update the UV map. Now we can get some texture maps for the material creation. Here I can drag in a web browser. I've done a search for CCO textures. The first one here I can click into. This is a PBR material library and we can click to browse materials. One set of texture maps we will need and they are for the road. So in search we can type and search road. That brings up a variety of materials and we can choose this one here. Usually with the initial scene setup I'll use a 1K JPG texture file. No need to use large files early and slow Blender. Instead, upscale once material decisions have been made. I'm going to download and save this folder. This is zipped, so make sure that after you download and save the folder to unzip it, and we'll look at importing the texture maps next. I can click back and I also want a second material. This time search for a metal set. Before you leave, download one from here. Once you have those materials, let's open back up Blender. Next up is the Node Wrangler add-on. We can open Preferences. In search, let's type Node Wrangler. The Node Wrangler add-on provides tools for a more fast and efficient material node setup. Enable this add-on and we can close Preferences. Let's switch into the Shading tab to add a material for this roadway. Press the / key to isolate this object. We can click New here and create a new material for the road. We can rename this Road. Press N to open the sidebar. Here there is a Node Wrangler tab. This Add Principled setup will automatically set up the texture maps we downloaded and unzipped from CCO Textures. Make sure you have them unzipped. First, select the Principled node to make sure it's selected. Now click Add Principled Setup. Navigate to where you have saved your texture maps. We can press A and select them all, then click Add Principled Setup. The textures will automatically get set up and connected, creating the material. Let's come back to the Layout tab. Next up is Material Library. Let's open Preferences and search Material. Put a check mark in Material Library. Expand this add-on and click Documentation if you want or need more information. This add-on will create a material library. This will allow you save materials and use them across your projects. This can be found in the Properties editor and in Materials. In the Materials tab below here, we have the Material Library VX. It's recommended to create a fake user for your materials after you get them created. That way, they don't get removed from Blender after you close the file if they're not assigned to an object. So click Fake User on the road material. Let's come down to Material Library VX. Here we can add a new library. We can rename this Material Library and click OK. Now with the road material selected, click and Add to Library. That brings us onto the Tissue add-on. Let's open Preferences and search Tissue. Put a check mark here and we can close this. On the sidebar in the Edit tab, we have the Tissue add-on. If we press M, we can see that the buildings collection is number 5. So in the scene, if we press 5, we can isolate this building collection. Let's select the first of these and tab into Edit mode. We can select it all and right-click and choose Subdivide. Increase the number of cuts, in this case 7, or a value that gives us a result for how the front needs to look. We can also select the roof and separate this as an individual piece. Let's tab back to Object mode. In the scene, make sure the cursor is at center. From the Add menu, let's add a plane to the scene. In the View menu, we can view selected to zoom in on this object. We can create a design for this window and add 2 materials. The first will be glass and the second the metal material from CCO Textures. This design can then be applied to the faces of the building using the Tissue add-on. This will be a simple example, but you can take this much further. Let's tab into Edit mode. I'm going to press Ctrl+R to add an edge loop. Roll the mouse wheel to increase the cuts to 2, left click, then right click. We can add 3 more across here and place them. Let's select all the internal edges on this object. Press Ctrl+B to bevel these edges. We can drag and left click. You can adjust the bevel width from the options box here. 0.03 works well for this object. Switch to Face Select up top here. Make sure just the beveled faces are selected. Press E, input 0.02 and enter. In the Select menu and More Less, increase selection once. Press Ctrl+I to invert the selection. Let's come to the Material tab and we can click New. Rename this Building. Click and add a fake user. Click the plus icon to add a second material slot. Click New and we can rename this Glass. Then click the Assign button to assign this to the selected faces. Also click and create a fake user. Then add both to the Material Library. Let's tab back to Object mode and we can shift select the first building. On the Tissue add-on, we can click Tessellate. The default settings will be fine and we can click OK. That creates a duplicated object, so we can select the original object and in the outliner, disable that object in the viewport and from render. The plane gets applied to the faces of the building. In the Object Data tab, you can adjust the settings and then update by refreshing. You can also make modifications to the plane and refresh for those changes to be updated on the building. The building material will use the metal texture maps from CCO Textures, so you can go ahead and update that material. The glass material we can update in the Shading tab. Increase the transmission to 1. Reduce the roughness to 0. Increase the metallic to 1. In the color swatch, reduce this and darken the glass a little. Let's switch back to the Layout tab. Select the plane and in the outliner, make sure that this will not render by disabling this setting here. Next is the Dynamic Sky add-on. Press F4 and come to the Preferences tab. Search Dynamic and Dynamic Sky should appear. Enable this, and if you need further information, check out the documentation. This add-on will create a procedural sky and light the scene. With this enabled, close this down. On the sidebar in the Create tab, open Dynamic Sky. Here we have the Dynamic Sky setting. Click Create to begin and add a procedural sky texture. Over on the Properties tab, open the World tab. In the drop-down, the Dynamic Sky is available. Here you can switch back and forth between the World and Dynamic Sky settings at any time. In the scene, press Z and switch to Rendered. This will include the Dynamic Sky in the preview render. Click this icon here and switch to User Perspective for this background environment to become invisible. On the add-on, you can then control the brightness, shadow, color saturation, change the sky's color, the horizon color, cloud opacity density. The sun control lets you adjust the sun value, hard and soft shadows, and sun direction. That brings us to the next add-on, Sun Position. Let's switch back to Solid Shading. Let's open Preferences and search Sun Position. This add-on lets you position and animate the sun's movement across the sky and simulate natural light. This can be found in the World tab. The first thing we need is a sun object. So from the Add menu in Light, let's add a sun. Then in the outliner, drag and drop that to paste in the sun object field. We can add the sun to its own collection, so press M and create a new collection. Rename this Light. Then Control click and add the light in here. Now in the collection drop-down, select that light collection. For the location, we can enter the coordinates. I can drag in a web browser. If you right-click, the coordinates are displayed. Click and copy these. Then we can paste these into the coordinates field here. That will update the settings. The distance of the sun isn't important to the lighting, just its direction. That brings us on to Stored Views. Let's open Preferences and search Stored Views. This add-on will store views at any location in the scene and can be easily accessed later. You can also add cameras to the current view. Let's open the Navigation tab for a moment. In the Fly and Walk area, expand Walk, and I'm going to increase the walk speed Fly to 100. Also, increase the speed factor to 10. This will increase the speed of navigating the scene. Because this is a large scene, this increase works. In future, you may need to change that back to the default setting of 2.5. Let's close this down. Let's press Shift and left click to switch back on all the collections. I have a clipping issue in the scene. In the View tab, I can input 2 mil for the clip start and 100,000 meters for the clip end. Now to navigate in the scene, we can press Shift plus the apostrophe key to fly. Use the W, S, A and D keys to move and the mouse for direction. I want to find a good location to set up a camera, somewhere in front of this building here. Left click to exit fly mode. Now we can open the View tab. In here we have the Store Views add-on down the bottom here. We can click Initialize to activate the add-on. Click New Camera to view. That places a new camera to our current view and also brings us into that camera view. They were some of the great add-ons available in Blender to help speed up your workflow. And that concludes this video.